What is politics? I have to say this is perhaps one of my favorite things to teach and learn about, um, but you could probably care less. So let's go ahead and get into this. As you look at this, what is politics? Immediately what should come to mind is what? On one side here we have the elephant, which represents the Republicans. We have the donkey that represents the Democrats. Over here, we have John Boehner, who is the Republican Speaker of the House. Very, very powerful position. He's actually number three in the line of succession to become president. So if President Obama were to die and Vice President Biden were to die, then John Boehner, a Republican from um, Columbus, Ohio, would become president. And then, of course, we have as the leader of the Democrats, we have President Obama. Note this is a much younger picture of him because if you've seen him recently, he is gray, big time gray. But I guess the question then becomes, what's politics? Um, as I throw my arms up in the air and no one's in the room to see me do it. But what is politics? This is a word that we hear a lot. You may be walking down the hallway and you hear somebody say, no, that's just political, or that's, you just, it's a term you hear a lot, but it's kind of a difficult one to kind of grasp. Well, this is a political cartoon here. Um, and there's two frames here. So the first one is, right, the first gentleman, I'd like your vote. The other gentleman, well, what do you have to offer? And he says, the power to take his money and give it to you. And he answers, sold. Now, how would this be politics? How does politics actually play into this? And you can see immediately what this politician is doing is separating the two, isolating one from the other. And literally he's saying, I have the ability to take his money and to give it to you. And he's like, oh yeah, I like this guy. But how is that politics? Well, let's look at, the every single facet of life. There is some sort of politics that goes along with it. And I've just thrown up a couple here, whether it's food politics or music politics. You know, what we're beginning to see is that in every facet of life, there is some sort of political um, aspect to it. So let's just take a couple of these, for example, and I'm not going to get too deep into them, but I would like for you to kind of grab one and kind of think, okay, well, what are the politics involved around food, for example? Let's think food politics. The number one thing I heard this year was Obama, that Michelle Obama making me have to eat. I can't have French fries. I can't have this. I can't have that. There's politics involved. And so we need to think in terms of, well, why would she advocate that schools provide healthier lunches? Well, on the other side, we have the largest rate of obesity in the world. Actually, we're number two now. Mexico just passed us. So Michelle Obama is really kind of pushing for, advocating for, better eating habits. But this is America. How can somebody tell me what I have to eat and what I can't eat? That's politics. Let's get another one here. How about let's go sports politics down at the bottom here. Think about it for a second. What might be some politics surrounding sports? Well, immediately what comes to mind is who's better, LeBron or Michael? If you're younger, you think LeBron's the best. If you're older, you think Michael Jordan's the best. That's just one simple argument. But also, sports politics might be, you know, should steroids be allowed in baseball? On one side, you would have people who would say, you know what? People lift weights, people eat well. Why not? If you let everybody have free access to it, then there's not a problem. It's only when you try to like restrict it that causes there to be some problems. On the other side, of course, somebody else might say, let's just keep the game pure. You can lift weights, you can eat right, but we're not going to enhance our strength or enhance our vision or our hand speed to be able to play baseball better. Sports politics. What happens if you play in Colorado that has legalized marijuana, but the league you play in the NFL has actually made the use of marijuana illegal? How do you reconcile that issue? That's politics. So what I'd like for you to do is, I'll kind of pause this for a second, but I'd like for you to pick one and see if you can't come up with what's some of the politics that go around it. A lot of people immediately go to pleasure politics, but really, I mean, you could do two things, or one thing really right off the top of your head is, how come in Las Vegas, prostitution is semi-legal? That they allow a limited form of prostitution, but in Indiana we don't. Why is that? And it all comes down ultimately to community standards and what's acceptable by the community. But take a look at that and see if you can't come up with some sort of argument back and forth. What I'd like to do is let's actually take a look at definition from dictionary.com, and there's a couple of pieces here that I really want you to be able to identify. And first of all, if you look under 1A, it's the art or science of government or governing. So politics is the idea that, it's an art or a science of ruling. That's politics. If you go down to 2A, the activities or affairs engaged in by a government, politician, or political party. Okay, so it's your activities. I like 2B here, the methods or tactics involved in managing a state or government. Tactics are like when you think about like strategy and tactics, you're trying to come up with a way to maneuver within, the minefield of society and to be able to come out a winner. So that involves some sort of like intrigue. If you actually go down here to number 4, intrigue or maneuvering within a political unit to gain control or power. So politics is used to kind of try to control people. We also see 5, political attitudes and positions, but I think the one maybe that I like the best, I like 2B, and I like 6, the often internally conflicting interrelationships among people in a society. The conflict between two people or two groups or two associations that ultimately, each group has its own wants and needs, and it's how do I get my wants and needs satisfied at the expense of you and your wants and needs. So it's kind of an interesting kind of take on this. Thomas Jefferson said this. He said, I hold it that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing, and as necessary in the political world as storms in the physical world. It is a medicine necessary for the sound health of government. So as I look at that, I'm going, okay, well, I see the word political here. I hold it that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing. So I guess what do storms in the physical world actually do? Besides the fact that they can be very dangerous and people get hurt and property gets damaged, you know, if man were not on this earth, storms would come through, and essentially storms are a way to kind of cleanse. You always have that after a storm, you go outside and there's that sense of like freshness and so to Thomas Jefferson, rebellion is a way to kind of cleanse the political world, that you need conflict to ultimately feel clean. Let's look at another one. Maybe you've heard of Aristotle. He was a Greek philosopher. But he said the state is a creation of nature, and man is by nature a political animal. That's kind of an interesting quote here because so the state, the nation is a creation of nature. So states naturally evolve in a state of nature because people need to find a place for security and safety. But man himself is by nature a political animal. So by nature, we're about conflict. You know, even your best friend, very few relationships don't have conflict. So you got to kind of learn to work with somebody and work around somebody. Let me kind of move on here. Um, Even in Alice in Wonderland, we get the idea of politics. The caterpillar says, "And what are you?" And Alice says, "I hardly know, sir. Just at present, at least I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have changed several times since then." The idea that to be a political animal, you have to be able to adapt to different situations. Here's a really kind of good cartoon, but somebody's sitting at the internet or at their computer and, "Are you coming to bed?" "I can't. This is important." "What?" "Someone is wrong on the internet." That's politics. Getting your opinion across to somebody else. Here's a political cartoon. So you get an elephant, again, that represents the Republicans, and you have what looks to be potential voters here. "We're against gay marriage and abortion." "Okay, well, what's your plan to get America back to work?" "We're against gay marriage and abortion." And you look at that and you go, what? Well, what he's doing, and I'm guessing it's a he, what the elephant is doing is ultimately finding issues that cause people to be fearful, to cause people to react. You know, to talk about jobs, nobody cares about jobs. I mean, if you don't have a job, you do. But people care about these really important issues, and gay marriage and abortion. Those are huge issues for the Republican Party. And so that's he's kind of using that as a way to kind of pull them in. Here's a political cartoon from actually the beginning of the 1900s. And so you get this little black child here who represents Africa, and you get this kind of fat, obese white guy who kind of represents kind of the West, like Europe and the United States. And the little child says, "I'm hungry." And the white guy says, "Stop talking politics." And you're like, "Well, how can hunger be politics?" Really? The United States, we could feed the world if we really wanted to, so why don't we? Because we don't want to hurt our farmers. We don't want to. There's a myriad of reasons, but we'll get into this.